American Sunday School Union camp. It was still Mt.Gilead, but it was through a group of people back east. And so, remember the people that used to ride they say they would take the horses and ride from town to town and preach in different towns. And so they called them circuit riding preachers. And that's how it started. And then they started campgrounds like Mt.Gilead all over the country. And so this group of people, well, in the early 60s, when the union started up, and unions got a real bad name, and because it was called American Sunday School Union, they changed the name from Sunday School Union to American Missionary Fellowship. And so they took that and went with it, and then this camp here was renting another camp, and then they wanted to have their own camp. So they found this place here, and so they decided to buy it and start the camp here. Well, they didn't know what they wanted to call it, so they sent out a letter to everybody that they knew. It says, we want to name this camp, so send in what you think it ought to be called. There was hundreds of people sending in names to what to call this. There was one lady that called in and says, call it Mt.Gilead, because Gilead is mine, saith the Lord. So Gilead is mine, saith the Lord. And that's what they chose. And so it's been Mt.Gilead all these years. So going back to our country changed the names of American Sunday School Union and all that because of different things. One of the things that has happened, Mt.Gilead has stayed Mt.Gilead, and that's because it does belong to the Lord. Each one that comes here is special, and you've done special things. So let me tell you a little bit about what happened in my life. See, I was working at your church, which was called American Sunday School Union, and I had 3 kids in a youth group, and I decided one day that these kids really liked to go to church, and so I'd take them fishing and take them places, and then they'd come and say, one of the kids came to me one day and says, how come we can't have a youth group like everybody else does? I said, well, if you bring your friends, we'll start one. 2 months' time, I had 30 kids in a youth group. All those kids just went out and brought all their friends and everybody, and so I had a motor home. It was a 24-foot Condor coach, and I'd use it for my bus. We'd take the kids all over the place, go fishing, backpacking, and everything. In fact, we took the whole church one time on a backpack trip up in the Sierras, and I've got a cabin up in the Sierras, and it's 15 miles off of the highway. There's a really rough road going in there. So anyway, we decided we'd go up there and go backpacking. So I pulled up along the road, and you could see a mountain over there and a lot of hills. And so I told him, I says, you see that mountain over there? And there was 3 or 4 mountains between us and there. And they says, yeah. And I says, well, I said, do you think you could get over there by yourself? No, too far and too many hills. I said, well, if you'll trust me, I've been there before, I'll take you over there. And I said, it's the same way with the Lord. I said, if you trust Him, He will take you through life's journeys and direction, and He'll put you on the other side. And He's put you here at Mt.Gilead for a special reason, because He's put you here. So anyway, what happened is the director of the camp, his name was Dwight Youngkite, and he knew that I could do building, and because Redwood and Pepperwood up here, when we was ready to build that, he come over and asked me if I'd bring some guys over and help build it. So I brought 10 guys, and we built Redwood and Pepperwood in one day. These guys are just fantastic partners and good, and we built those 2 buildings in one day. And then the Hill House down here where Dave lives, okay, they asked me to come and build that that house. And I says, okay. And I was working at the camp and full time, and I had to take off time to do that. So anyway, when we went to that, come over to the camp, and the guy that I brought with me, I brought one guy with me, and that one guy worked for me at the housing tract, and I'd ask him 2 or 3 times to go to church with me, and he'd say, I'm not interested. And so after a couple months, I was having vacation Bible school, and I went and asked him, I says, if I take your kids to Bible school, will you let them come? I don't care, he said. So I picked his kids up all 5 days, took them to Bible school. They'd never been in church before. They didn't know anything about the Lord. And at Bible school, the 3 of them, the older ones, they accepted Christ at Bible school. And they were so excited about learning about Jesus and Him coming, saving them. They'd go home and they'd tell their parents all about what Jesus would do. Well, after Bible school, it was a Wednesday night, and we had a prayer meeting at church, and I was there. This guy, Frank, come and found me, and he says, my kids have been talking to me about Jesus and being saved, and he says, I don't know how. Will you help me? And so I led him to the Lord tonight, and then I taught him all the layouts of the houses and kept him going to the house. And so after that way, I was going to build this hill house up here. So I invited him to come with me. And so he came, the 2 of us put that house up in one day. And I mean 1 week. We had spent a whole week over here building the hill house. And so one of the crazy things that God did in my life during that time is there was a lady working here in the kitchen, and the director here at the kitchen says, I'm going to have dinner for the guys down at the house, the ones that's building the house. Says, will you come down? She says, no, I'm going to stay here and work. She says, well, if you come, I'll come back and help you. So anyway, she went to the house down there and had dinner for me and Frank and the other guy. And so we was there, and after dinner, why we left, and the lady says, well, what did you think? Say, Emma's first husband had died 5 years before. He had an operation and he didn't make it. So he was already passed away. And so the lady asked Emma, says, what do you think about The Bachelor? And she says, well, which one was he? And she said, explained to him. She says, oh, the bald-headed one? No, thank you. She didn't want to do with the bald-headed guy. So anyway, she was always here in the kitchen. And when we'd have kids, and we used to have a girl counselor in the Redwood, and in the Pepperwood, I would counsel the boys. So after that, why we'd get together and talk about what the kids had done, if they'd accepted the Lord or rededicated their life to the Lord or anything. Then we just got acquainted that way, talking about the kids and what they'd done when I was counseling. Well, it happens that she didn't want anything to do with me, she just wanted to talk about the kids. So then we would come over and I'd bring my youth group to camp and we'd have work days and do different things. And so she was here, so she got to basically she fell in love with me. I just wasn't ready to do anything. I didn't want to. I liked her as a Christian sister, but I didn't want to have a relation with her. So she started praying for me that God would do something with me. And she got another lady to pray with her. And they prayed for 8 years before I turned around. I was working here and they just kept praying that God had turned. So after we was married, she let me read the letter that she wrote to God about me. And she wrote this letter and I read it. And she says, Lord, if you're not in this, she'd already prayed for 3 years for me. And I wasn't doing nothing. She says, if you're not in this, take this burning in my heart away because it's too painful. Well, God didn't take it away. She kept praying for me for 8 years. And then we moved over to built the chapel and was married in that chapel. So,
Jim, tell them how you first came here.
Yeah.
That's before Emma and everything.
So what happened is when he asked me to come to Mt.Gilead and build a chapel because he knew I was a builder, and I told him I couldn't come. It was 1 year later he come back to the camp.
So first he said no, and he needed a year to God to work on him and some other things.
Right, so I had all those things. My mother was with me, and my youth group, and my job, and all of that, and I just couldn't quit all of that and come to build a chapel for 2 years. So anyway, when he come that second time,
A year later.
he asked me, he says, here's what happened. He says, I went to this guy who builds many warehouses in the Bay Area, and he said, he took the plans and he looked at them and he come back and says, I will build a chapel for you. But he says, I don't have time to use volunteer help. I got to bring my own men, and you have to have all the materials on the site when I come. And he gave him a price of $500,000 to build it. And Dwight come back over to the job and found me over in Backville where I was working. Told me the story. He says, we can't afford that kind of money to build it. He says, Jim, would you reconsider? You know, when one of the disciples was a tax collector, and he was sitting at his table, Scripture says, and collecting taxes from all the Jewish people and everything, and he was making lots of money. And Jesus walked by and says, follow me. You know what he did? He got up, he left that table, all his money, just left everything and followed Jesus. And if I had an excuse when he asked me to go to Mt.Gilead that second time, I said, would you reconsider? That's the way I felt. No excuses. I was going to go. So then I told him that I had to take my mother with me because I couldn't leave her for 2 years. And so I went up to the cabin where she was staying. And I walked up to the front door, and she saw me coming. She walked out the door, and the first thing in her mouth, I didn't say a word to her about going to Gilead. She says, Jim, if you're ready to go to Mount Gilead, I'm ready to go. Wow, blew me away. I was there to ask her to come, and she says, I'm ready to go. And she told me later that she had listened to a Bible on her radio, and the preacher had said, if you don't do what God says you do, calls you to do, you're hindering him, you're lying to him. And it convicted her. So she was ready to go to Mount Gilead when I come. Packed her up, and we went to the church. On Sunday, went to church, and I just felt led to ask. I says, I need a man and a woman to take over the youth group. Remember, I had 30 kids in the youth group, big kids. And so there was a man and a woman, stood up immediately from the announcement and says, we've been praying about getting involved with the youth. And so they stepped in, took over the youth group, and then I had to go to my boss, because I had 30 men working for me and on this housing tract. And I was telling him I was going to go to Mt. Gilead and build a chapel. I'd be gone at least 2 years. And I told him that Frank, I taught him all the layouts of the houses. He was a good foreman. He'd do a good job for you. He says, I've been watching him. He's doing a good job. He says, I'd let him be foreman. So he says, come down to the office. And he took me down to the office. And he took me in. And when he come back out, he had a brand new skill sign in his hand. He says, you'll need this over there. So, brand new skill sign. The other thing was, I had an antique automobile business. I built a big warehouse, 40 by 80. It was full of antique cars and all kinds of things. And my thought was, if I leave for 2 years, they would steal me blind. So when I told the people at the job, all my men, I got them together, and I told them that I was going to be leaving for 2 years to build this chapel, and Frank was going to be their new foreman, and I said, I want you to do a good job for him. They agreed they would. So they all went back to work. One young fellow, about 24, stayed behind, and when he come, after they left, he come up and he says, Jim, if you're going to be gone for 2 years, I just got married. Can I rent your house and take care of your needs? So God took care of all of that, and I didn't worry about anything. I just walked away, and I wound up here. And so the first place I was going to live was Hearst Castle. There's no electricity, no water, no nothing up there then. And so I got that and was going to move up there. And then Darrell Hurst, one of the board members, says, I got a house over here on Thomas Road. He says, it's in the apple orchard. He says, I'll let you have that. So we went over there, and it was a good house, except that all the guys in the orchard, there was no restrooms over there. So they'd use the house for a bathroom. So when I moved in there, I still remember I had to take a shovel and stuff out the window and get it cleaned up. And then we got some different stuff, sanitized the floor and everything. So my mom and I lived in that. But when I moved over here, there was a young fellow who was about 21, and he quit his job, and he wanted to come and help me build a chapel. So he just left his job, come over here to help me build a chapel. And they couldn't pay him nothing, so he was living with my mom and I, and in this house over here on Thomas Road. So when we was in there, we didn't have much money. One day we come home from work, and my mom had a little glass bowl about this big around, had a glass lid on it. That was on the table and had a little chicken in it. The guy says, "What's that?" My mom says, "Well, I didn't have any money to buy nothing, so I shot that old buzzard that's been flying around here. That's what we got for supper." He wasn't sure he wanted to eat a buzzard. But anyway, later she told us it was a little chicken. It wasn't really a buzzard. Anyway, when God took me to Mt.Gilead, He solved all of my problems, all my things, my money problems, everything. And so,
Well,
what I want
let me add
to
something to that. So,
is that God has
Jim,
given you this time to be here at Mt.Gilead, and it's not your choice, it's His choice. And
so when he was building houses, he was making almost $200 a day. And then when he finally said yes, he came and they could only pay him $500 a month. So a little bit different. So, but he knew the call of God on his life, gave up what in the early 70s he was doing very well, to give that up to come because that's what God called him to. So for a 2-year project that turned into 20, that turned into a life of living. I mean, Mt.Gilead is in his blood. I mean, I've been with Jim for 6 years. I've known him, and Mt.Gilead is just his life, because he's lived here and is invested in so many people. So the call of God brought him here, and that whole story of how he when he said yes, God turned every no into a yes by solving every little issue that he could possibly use to say, no, I can't do this. God took care of every little thing, and they didn't have much when he first came here, or even a lot of the time, but God still provided for him. And even the house where he built, because you don't have too much time, so I'll just say it real quick, is he got a piece of land that they were selling for $535,000. He got it for $35,000, built his house there, and then lived here while he was him and Emma, when they got married, and he was part of Mt.Gilead. I mean, the blessings it's just pretty incredible. And yeah, so
the other thing I wanted to share with you, next time you go in a chapel, look up and see the big trusses up there. They're 4x14s and big long ones and everything in there. So when I built the chapel, I needed a crane to lift them big trusses up there. There's the trusses I built down in the warehouse in the wintertime when it was raining, and then I hauled them up here and had them stacked outside the chapel. Well, I decided I needed a crane, so I got an old 37 Chevy truck. It was a long wheelbase, and I cut the middle out of it and moved the rear end up close, and it had a 4-speed transmission. I put another 4-speed transmission behind that one. And so I had 2 4-speed transmissions, and I had the thing, and it had a boom on it. Well, boom was only about 10 feet tall, wasn't near tall enough to set them trusses up. So I cut a pepperwood tree, about that big around. I tied it to the boom in this old truck, put a pulley up on top, and then I picked the trusses out, put them up on the thing. And they said I was crazy, but it worked. Anyway, God's
made his own crane.
last years. Thanks for letting me share.
That's wonderful, Jim. Thank you.